Welcome, William. Lovely. That was the recording that we said we would do. Councillor Ormsby and anyone else, I'm not sure if Councillor Brown's still with us. She may not be. She wasn't feeling well this morning. So for their benefit, we will record. So we'll hand over to you, William. I have asked Angie and Sue from Ahuriri Protection Society if they'd like to join us for the workshop.
Copy. I was just looking for one on the table.
Estuary Protection.
Ahuriri Estuary Protection Society. Leaving out the estuary, that's not a good start, is it? Thank you, Angie. Yeah, over to you, William.
Atamaria tata, ai mihi mahana kia kau te hui mai nei, I tēnei ata ki te kōrero, ki te whakamahi tēnei kaupapa, whakahira, te ahuriri, te whanga o te, te whanga o te aira, tēnei mahi, no reira e mihi mahana. So yeah, lovely to be here today. So we've got two parts to this paramahi. So we'll just talk through our presentation, provide an update on where we are currently at, what we're currently doing, and then also do a bit of a workshop. As you see, there's a couple of papers that I've placed around here on the tables, just in regards to the presentation here, but to also workshop some of the kōrero today. Apologies to those online, but I think Gabe's going to provide, once we get into that side of the mahi, provide some notes on that. So we'll just get into it. So
lovely. And we have all had that pre-circulated as well. So our ones online do have that.
Awesome. So what we have done to date, so as Cam alluded to as part of his presentation, we've finalised that draft engagement plan. We've started scoping that engagement and what that looks like. So Connie has been doing some beautiful mahi in the background, working with representatives around how we facilitate the kōrero with hapu and marae. But also, as Cam alluded to, we've had our first tag kōrero as well, but also the kōrero with airport and dock 2. So it's good that we've got some of that underway. So we've also been refining what some of the project vision, the narratives are. So we've had a workshop with Tipene and Shade following our previous hui that we had, refining some of the opportunities from mana whenua perspectives, what that looks like, and then also testing some of the ideas and opportunities there, and then also understanding the opportunities and constraints as well. So just a bit of kind of our next steps as part of this is to align the works against the Te Muriwa Te Whanga plan, which was brought up as part of Cam's kōrero, advancing those co-design wānanga with Ahuriri Hapu and our tag komiti, distilling the ideas and opportunities, constraints, and then refining and grounding the ideas to develop those schematic plans. So what's been done is we've provided or started to sketch more conceptual thinking, those straw man ideas, understand what we currently know, and understand from all the mahi to date. So kind of just going back, so again, understanding the site analysis, so being able to hikoi the site a couple of times now, understanding, all of the constraints, conditions, the opportunities, key concerns. They've informed some of the kōrero and opportunities that we've developed to date. Key constraints mapping. Gabe, are you online? Would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, there he is.
Yes.
Kia ora everyone. My name is Gabriel, for those I haven't met. I'm based down in our Ototahi office, so I'm remoting in for this one. So the constraints mapping is really just refining some of the biophysical mapping of the site to understand what constraints we have to work within when we start looking at the design. So on the screen here, you can see you've got some basic topography. So that's the upper left-hand diagram, high points and low points, and a lot of that is legacy from the original lagoon. The next one down is just looking at how that reflects in the flooding. So that's a flooding forecast for the year 2100. So looking into the future, what the site may look like. And then the bottom left is looking at buffers and also the airport control boundaries, which is a critical consideration. The composite map you see in the center of the plan, it just gives us a bit of a guidance of the overall structure for the park. We've got the Becker design overlaid on there, which is really just to give a bit of a size reference. So we expect we'd be able to work closely with the engineers once they're appointed to that to make sure that that fits into the overall concept for the wider landscape that we've got. And certainly we'll be aiming not to have it quite so rectilinear, working with the natural patterns. You can see the key development or key area where you could potentially accommodate any sort of built facilities or forms outside of the main constraints being flooding, the buffers from the highway and the estuary, and also the keeping clear of the wetland areas is that little wedge, which we've got annotated there, about 20 hectares worth of area. So it's still a large area, but that's sort of guided. I guess that structure has sort of helped guide the initial thinking will reflect in the Strawman. Thanks, Will.
Good point.
Will, Gabe, can I just ask you a question? In that key development opportunity zone, I think we currently have a temporary lease to a land surfing blow kart
Correct, yes.
area. I was just making sure that was on your radar as part of consideration.
Yeah, yes, that sits underneath what the Becker plan has shown as a flood conveyance corridor. So that's definitely something we'll have to consider as we move through the process, and that'll probably be reflected in the sort of next iteration of plans to start to work through what's going to fit where.
Can I just get a question, just in relation to the lease? What period or term is that for? Is it? Yeah, you might not be answering. I'm just wondering how long.
I'm not 100%. I know that the club was aware of our plans to obviously transform this area into the purpose we're looking at. So I imagine it's quite short term, but I don't have the details.
Yeah, I don't. In terms of what they've got on this site, there's not a huge amount of infrastructure. So I think if there is a better use for that land, I don't think that will be a key obstacle. We're planning a very long-term developments here, and I think there's going to be plenty of time to work out where they might fit in the broader scheme.
So since we're on that corridor, I suppose when you look at, and I think in your report, it suggested that's the only area that potentially you can build with the access off the road, and that, is that correct? So that's the only potential building site?
Well, I mean, if you throw enough money at it, you could build almost anywhere. That's based on the general constraints we've mapped out. That is basically the high ground. So that is where you're going to have less challenges with having to build up to get out of the flood zone in the future. It's not a hard line per se, because I mean you could equally push out maybe out to the west. There may be an opportunity there where maybe if we've got these excavations happening, you could build up some areas and look at doing some built development there. But bearing in mind previous discussions with the JC is probably fairly limited in terms of development at this stage. But that's something we need to test further with yourselves and the tag team about what the form and shape of that function and program might be.
Sorry, and just to quantify my corridor, and I might be jumping the gun because I've mostly read ahead, and it was just about some of the suggestions that were made around, I think, in one of the plans that I read, it said something like public calling and other sites and that, so I was just eliminating from my mind. I mean, is that realistic, or should they just be crossed off? And if that's the only building site for that in this plan, then it's not pointless wasting energy if it's not going to happen, and putting it up as option because
and that's part of the kaupapa today is you see that we provided a bit of a overall thinking and ideas where we're currently at, and I guess the kaupapa for today is see what is possible, what's feasible, what's going to be most effective here. Do we focus on that? Are those the opportunities that we want to do, or is it more kind of the restoration of the whenua? So there's all of those things that we'll work through as part of this. So
thank you.
Sorry, Gabe, while I have you, one other quick question. That buffer zone that we've sort of drawn around the outside of the site, what methodology was used to do that? Was it something I read highway corridor?
It's probably somewhat arbitrary. So it's about if I recall rightly, it's probably about a 30 to 40 meter buffer off the highway. and that's more around providing enough space to buffer out the acoustic effects of the roadway traffic. The one off the estuary, I believe that one was set at about 100 meters, if not more, and that was more about making sure we consider the impacts of the wildlife that are using the estuary. So if you are bringing activities or programs within that zone, then it triggers okay, we need to make sure we're balancing the ecological effects of that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think that might be worth just having a bit more of a think about. Just noting, of course, we've only got roadway along two of the lengths of the park. So to keep maybe the same buffer along what is probably a cycleway might not be quite as necessary.
I guess just to qualify that was driven by some ecological advice we had back in the Lagoon Farm land use strategy, and there was really looking at making sure that we encapsulate in the thinking even cycleway or other activities going on there is going to disturb some of the wildlife. So it's just making sure we are tracking that as we develop the design.
Okay, thank you. That makes more sense.
Yep.
Can I comment at some point? Excuse me. Hello, I'm Angie from the Ahuriri Estuary Protection Society. From your large page map, it looks like, I suppose it's the word softening of the stop bank has taken away a huge habitat called the Southern Marsh, which is part of the wildlife refuge. It's currently not tidal, and a lot of birds come to there, and you can see it on your original map on the screen.
Angie, we might get to that when we get to those maps rather than this one. So we'll work our way through. So I think there's a whole lot of questions when we get to that map. So we'll reserve that one if that's all right.
Okay. Sure, thanks.
Couple. Just continue. So with that constraints mapping, so what we've started to prepare, still draft, is understanding or developing a framework to help inform the master plan. So based on some of the kōrero to date with Tipene and Shade, and also wider team, we've taken some of the guidance from the Uriuri and also the Pepeha as a way to inform and ground this kaupapa. So that concept of the mahinga kai has been quite prominent in terms of the kōrero to date. It's kind of been kept coming back to that concept. And then also taking the guide around what some of the key design drivers might be, which, as part of the principles, we're keen to start to flesh out further as part of the engagement. But, what's been talked about to date and explored to date is around, certainly concepts of adaptation, drivers of adaptation, management resilience, community activation and activities, connections, creative expression and storytelling, trade and economy, maturanga, and health and wellbeing and Māori. So those are some of the drivers that have been highlighted to date. And so with that, starting to ground them a bit further in terms of what some of those guiding principles might be. Again, keen to flesh that out further. But at the moment, we've kind of brought them under these four guiding principles around the environmental, around the social, around the economic, and then around community. And a lot of this has all been from the kōrero to date and from what we've gathered from information, reports, and other things. Really starting to synthesize all of those aspects as part of this. So, the importance of why has been coming up: quality, water quality, diverse ecosystems, enhancement of the area to replace monoculture there, embedding nature-based solutions, restoring maturanga. I know it was something very important and significantly mentioned by Tipene. How do we tell those stories appropriately and respectfully? Celebrating the uniqueness of this space, supporting those opportunities to establish, recreation activities. So what are those? What might those be? How do we provide those opportunities for people to learn and grow their knowledge? And then how to allow spaces to adapt and change as well. And then there's all these economic opportunities that you'll see as part of the next couple of slides. We've started to tease out what some of those might be, but also exploring as we move forward, the potential of those, what's going to be most appropriate here. And then the healthy communities, ensuring that inclusive and safe access, place of welcoming and manaaki, that concept of kaitiakitanga, and then, the concept of te whare tapawha, how we might build around that.
Are you interested in sort of feedback and discussion as you go, or you want to circle back around?
Totally open to whatever is comfortable for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think a bit of a pause and a
Pause.
korero as we go. Yeah,
Cool.
Button.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
button, yeah.
Butt on in.
Oh, yeah.
On design principles, so
Aye.
that previous slide,
Yes.
all looks really good. I think for me, what didn't stand out, and it might just be in our heading, was that kind of we talk about environmental well-being, but it's kind of I'd like it to be more specific to the the key infrastructure we're putting in here, which is our commitment to achieving that.
Yeah.
So it's probably more around the heading and maybe just elevating
Aye.
some of those. When we talk about the wetlands and we talk about the water quality and things like that, maybe in that first
Yep.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah. Is there any while we're on this slide?
Oh.
Tariha?
No, I was just saying, who put the PowerPoint together? Did you put it together?
Yes.
I'm just cut out of 3 of those photos.
Oh, are you? All right. No, if we can get
Couple.
Chad in at least one photo, please.
Send them to me. No, send them to me. But this is what this is all about, is just starting that discussion. And as we get into the engagement, this is what we'd be keen to test and explore with the wider community. So with Hapu, with our tag, I'm starting to test that. So hence this framework. So based on those 4, guiding principles or guiding themes, and then bringing those key design drivers, setting up this framework. So the concept of the kupenga, how do we start to draw on that? And hence you'll see in front of you, those in the room, this design exploration and establishing the potential. So you'll see you've got that in front of you, post-it. So colours assigned to it. So as we talk through, it'd be great to get your whakaaro, your ideas around, what some of these activities or what those potentials are within each of these. Are these starting to align with your thinking, your ideas? Are there things in there that you think shouldn't be here? Are there things we should be placing a hierarchy on? So that's what we want to get out of today, is certainly in the room, testing these ideas, is exploration, exploring the potential of what could be here, and then starting to, as we move forward with the process, refine those further. So, as part of that environmental well-being, we've started to explore and test, these cultural ecotones. So how might we establish these rich habitats? Is there opportunities to create these ecotones that could be used for harvest? Are they permanent? Are they temporal? How might we reuse the whenua itself on the land? There's going to be, as you see earlier in that the constraints mapping that Gabe talked about, there will be a lot of cut. So how do we reuse the whenua in an authentic way, and then creating those habitats for aquatic life? I think we had a discussion last week as part of the tag with tipini. There's some, are there some specific species that we're keen to bring back, highlight, how do we bring those back into this space? And then your activation, cultivation, all these big ideas around, what some of the recreational activities might be. Could we do an eco-sanctuary here? Open spaces which are adaptable, kind of coming back to that cultural harvesting. Could we create forests that could be harvested for timber for waka building, po for kairo, for arts, mahi toi. So, all of these ideas, network trails, and then also looking at economic opportunities. What might those be? Could you develop a nursery, as part of the phasing? Textiles, all of these ideas that you see here, keen to start refining those, and how, what's going to be specific here for site. And then, those healthy and sustainable communities. So, could there be opportunities for papakainga? Could mana ahuriri and taiwhenua have a presence on site? So, all of these ideas. So we'll get into the mirror board, I think, after we've finished our presentation and talk it all through. I might hand over to you, Gabe, to talk through these strawman concepts in prelim.
Thanks, Will. So these, we'll just skip through these generally. Some of you have seen these previously, and these are just some initial explorations of how spaces and programs might be laid across the site. Some of them responding to the existing landform, others looking at how can we soften the potential engineered hard edge we've got that's formed by the stop banks currently. So I probably won't dwell on these ones though, because we have sort of jumped forward to some more refined ones. Maybe Will, should we slide on to those ones? So I guess just to help discussion, we've developed 3 sort of refined strawmans. We've sort of given a thematic name to each one. So maybe what I'll do is we'll just go through and present each of these, and then maybe after that we've got a chance for a bit of korero back and forth about what you think. And I think this can also tie back to some of the other questions that Will's just posed about what the programs might fit into those. So this one we've looked at, okay, if we were to be ambitious and look at retreating the stop bank back to allow us to create some more room for the estuary, what would that do in terms of the internal program? So it would be compressing the spaces we need for the stormwater management and treatment areas. So how does that look on the site? This one is based around a concept of, we've got the external islands, so the estuary islands, which would be like estuary scrape, similar to what you see around south of the airport. Then we have got some internal islands. So the idea of the excavated materials from some of the wetland treatment could be mounded up and turned into sculptural landforms, which could reference back to some of the old island formations you see in the wider landscape. And then wrapping that with a coastal forest planting association, which you see in the darker green wrapping around. This one is showing an entrance hub sort of centrally located off Pre-Benson Drive, off the roundabout, which is probably one of the most logical places to put it. You've got good clearance from the main highway intersection further to the east, and it brings you into a bit more of a central site part of the site. The red arrows you see there were marked on top after we're at the last tag session, and that was just a reference that as you come along Pre-Benson Drive, it's going to be really important to create vistas and views into the site to help really get people engaged in what's happening there and aware of what's happening in that broader project. Next one, Will. So this one was talking about what would it look like if we kept the stop banks largely intact and really maximize that sort of wetland landscape internally, so the freshwater landscape. So the idea of this one was that when we work with the engineers to set the structure for these 3 different wetland cells, which is based on the 3 different catchments, urban catchments running into the site, that they actually be landscaped so they read as one big wetland association. So not 3 distinct items necessarily, but a whole corner of that site would become dominantly wetland and planted with reeds, cattails, lots of sort of wetland association plants, with more of the coastal forest association wrapping around the eastern side and then providing a bit of a northern buffer to the site as well. This one's similarly, we've got some indication of nominal access through the site and some focal points, the little red squiggles, again with the entrance hub off Pre-Benson Drive. The sort of blue arrows you see traveling through the site to the stormwater storage zone is just representing where the flood channel would be entering into the site. So we'll have to allow for some low sort of flood channels points. So when you do get large rainfall events, the water can move from the Pitamu channel and the Taipo into the stormwater storage zone. So they're not necessarily going to be full of water all the time, but there'll be an overflow channel. Next one, Will. And then this one was a somewhat of a hybrid approach. So what would happen if we left the Taipo stop bank largely intact, but looked at some selected areas of retreat along the estuary itself to allow a bit more room to create some smaller estuary islands and to soften that interface with the main channel. Internally, this one looked at picking up on some of the existing axes that run across the site, and that was largely formed by drainage that was installed after the earthquake. which is now picked up in drains with some shelter belt planting and access tracks through the site. So the idea of exploring on this one is, okay, if we created a bit more of a segmented site approach, which created really strong connections and access through the site, what could we fit in terms of program around those patterns? I'm not sure this is the most successful one, but we just wanted to put this out there as a bit of an idea. Actually, we'll just jump to the next page.
Cool.
And this might be useful just to have on screen to sort of help prompt the discussion. So looking at a bit more of a finer grain, we picked one of the concepts, which is the Repa Nui, the large wetland one, which is keeping the stop banks largely intact. What program could we lay out within the site? What sort of access and circulation could we look at? What sort of elements do we want to include and not want to include? So I think this is probably a good discussion point. You see that on this one, we've got the main entry coming off Pre-Benson Drive. We've indicated a potential for a nursery and maybe service yards up to the left-hand side. I don't know if you can point to that, Will.
No, I don't think I can.
Okay, all right. And then as the yellow access road curves around, you've got a visitor centre, a nominal visitor centre, maybe an education or cultural centre. And then as you go around further to the right-hand side, we've got a complementary commercial area indicated. And that may include the existing blow cart facility, or maybe there's other facilities we want to look at. I guess we have to remember this is a very large site, so there's actually quite a lot of room to work with. And I think there's lots of opportunities, depending on what yourselves and the tag and the other stakeholders think is going to work here. To the north, we've shown amphitheatre open space. So that was really just to start teasing out, is this something that's appropriate to the site? Is it something that we should be trying to consider moving forward? This one is showing quite a large area. The feedback we got from the tag meeting was pretty clear that they didn't think that there was a need for it on this site. There's other places in the wider community which is already set up to be able to hold festivals and concerts and things like that. And this would run somewhat contrary to some of the ecological and sort of cultural aspirations for the park. But we just wanted to put it in there to sort of test how that would work. In the wider scheme, you can see there's the ribbon of yellow which runs out to the west-hand side to an area we've notated as aquaculture, ponds, nursery. And that was exploring the idea, if we were able to give the engineers a challenge that at the end of these wetland treatment systems, we want to have a water quality good enough to support some aquaculture activities, and be that something for harvest, say freshwater crayfish or tuna, eel, maybe even inanga, which is obviously a bit more of a challenging thing to grow artificially. But be interesting to try create a bit more of a circular economy. We've got this resource of water coming through the site. What can we do to use that? And that may become more of a nursery thing. So it's a way of sourcing some of this mahinga kai species that can be then seeded into the wider landscape, not just here, but maybe wider in the motu as well. Perhaps I will leave that there and invite discussion. Well, I was wondering if it's worth switching to the Miro board, because what I thought we could do is then we can zoom around to look at different things, and I can actually tag notes and even some sketching as we discuss it. I think there's probably some good feedback. I know that Angie, sorry I didn't catch your name.
Denby.
Denby. This will be a good time for you to give us the feedback you started before, because then I can actually put some notes directly on our plans.
Where did you want to start?
Now, yeah, okay. There's areas of the estuary that are a nationally significant wildlife refuge, and it has that label. And that includes that top right-hand corner of that straight channel there. And so there's a large pond in that area called the Southern Marsh, and it has a large bird population of all kinds, and it's not tidal.
So just to be clear, so is where I've circled now, is that the area you're talking about?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Angie, were you saying in one of the plans we've touched that area?
Well, aren't you changing the shape of the stop bank there and taking it, curving it down and around? Or am I
So just to clarify, those sketch plans, we generally our site boundary basically runs along here. So we're not including that as part of the overall park development necessarily. We are showing potentially there might be some intervention, something like that, but we respect that that's a really high value habitat already, and we don't want to interfere with that. So we'd be looking at keying into that, but not changing anything within that zone.
So Gabe, just to clarify for on Angie's query, that dark boundary that you've got in some of the straw men, that's the boundary of the park, not the stop bank. Is that correct?
I'll zoom over to those.
Oh, maybe these ones.
So for instance, I'll go to the middle one, I'll just draw a line. So this through here, basically following the edge of the South Marsh, which would sit in there. So it's a loose graphic, so we can probably tighten that up just to make sure it's not confusing. So, it would be something more like that, the water edge. So we're not going to be, I'll confirm, we're definitely not going to do anything to interfere with that.
But I think what will be important is understanding the interface between that and what we do there. So, be getting that guidance.
And so leading on from that comment then, coastal forest in that position is not a desirable thing for wading birds and shorebirds, etc. They like wide open spaces where they can see what's around them for their own protection. So if it was me, if you're going to put forest, it would be more towards the hills.
Yeah, so we sort of got a bit of a tension there because obviously the airport operations considerations, they want to try to keep as many birds out of their flight path as possible. So I guess recognition of what they're after would be these sort of areas where we'd be looking to provide for more of those open wading environments. This area, I guess the intent of putting the forest in there is exactly as you say, to try not to encourage any birds that like those wide open spaces, and particularly the problematic ones like the Canada geese and swans and plovers and things like that do well like that, being able to see where the predators are. I think this interface through here, you've got the existing buffer planting that's been put in there, aki, and a few other lower growing species, I think Kanuka, Manuka. So I think when I say forest association, that would be able to look at creating I guess a continuum of forest through there. So you'd have shorter stuff on the edge, which wasn't going to interfere with the use of the wading habitat. And then maybe there's just the taller forest towards the center of this area, something like I'm drawing now. So you may have a sort of graduated planting design approach.
So what you're talking about does affect that southern marsh area. I have heard feedback from a previous wildlife officer that legends planting, and I think that's possibly the trees you're talking about there, was a very inappropriate place to put those trees. But of course, we're talking from the perspective of the wildlife.
Yeah.
So Angie, when you say that will affect that southern marsh area, being that that's now farmland and roads and things like that we're talking about transforming into coastal forest, how does that affect the marsh area that we're not touching?
Well, by the fact that it hides the view of the animals, the birds living there. But that seems an odd place to stick a forest in the middle of a totally flat area. But anyway, that's just my initial reaction.
Could we, just make sure that that concept of the coastal forest, that's a point of discussion for TAG, as so that technical advisory group sort of works through, what activities where on site makes sense from a perspective of the bird life.
And just one final thing, I see there's a lookout in the corner there. There is a bird hide a little bit further along that stretch where the cycle track is, and I know Isabel Morgan, our previous chairperson, certainly had to be in discussion with whoever built the bird hide that it be below the stop bank and not sticking out above. So I'm not sure what your lookout looks like.
Neither are we, to be honest. So it's really just nominating that that's a key point on the site if you were to keep that existing stop bank, I guess, access through there. So the initial images you'll see, if you just go to slightly to the left, Will, you can see some ideas of something quite tall to provide people the opportunity to get a big vista over the wider landscape, which is very flat, but certainly open to feedback around, you know, is that appropriate? Is if it's not, is there somewhere else we should be looking at doing that? So from what you're saying, anything with any verticality is not desirable from a bird perspective. Is that correct?
Well, I'm just going on what happened with the previous bird hide, that whoever wanted to build it wanted to put it on top of the stop bank, and Isabel worked really hard to get it lowered so that it was more level with the stop bank.
What's
Is that correct?
What's a bird hide?
It's just a little building where you go in and there's a narrow viewing passage to look out over the birds.
Right.
It's for
there's
humans.
And there's one there now.
Yes, there's one there now,
Okay. That makes sense.
unless someone's removed it.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, that bird hide is below the stop bank. The platform is, but it does elevate about 5 feet above the stop bank itself. So,
Well, it needs to see over the stop
yeah,
bank.
and it's just enough
Yeah.
of platform so where you can have a good visual of the estuary.
Just a piece of feedback from me. It doesn't match my vision of the park, these sort of high built lookout structures. And for discussion for the committee, if we're going to build any sort of elevated platform to have vistas over the estuary or back into the park, which I think is a lovely idea, it would need to be a really natural elevation to a higher point than a built structure as such. Is just my thinking.
Another idea that we have talked about is with the earth moving, which may be required to form some of these wetland landscapes. We could really play with the topography. So maybe if we do want that opportunity to get a vista, there could be some some mounds built with that excess spoil. So that could be another way to achieve that without having to have a structure.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have a concern with, say, a shade structure or something like that over top of, but rather than some sort of tower that you climbed or something like that, I think a natural bottom edge to get that elevation makes a lot more sense.
And one final thing, the 4-lane expressway up to Watchman Road. I've seen something written down on paper about that, so that's going to need to go over the estuary.
Don't know anything about that, and probably not. We don't have any roading designations over this piece of land, so it's not a consideration for the park. I imagine Watchman Road, Gabe and William is at the airport entrance, sort of more northern to this site.
I could I'm providing a cultural impact assessment to Trek at the moment, who this will help inform their design. We can take that into consideration and put that in the report. That might help.
So their motorway, if they add 2 lanes on, which they propose to, either goes over the top of the scrapes, or if it's on the other side of the road, at-risk plants that we've been researching and looking at.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit outside of what we're scoped to look at here, but certainly worth knowing about.
So what does the future connection to the north mean, and an arrow across the channel there?
Well, there was the historic connection that you can still see the remnants of. So I guess this is something which we're keen to get feedback on, and it probably will tie into what's happening with the wider Te Whanga plan. Is there an opportunity to create a pedestrian access through to the north? Is there a need or a want? Bearing in mind that there's fairly limited access through the highway corridor, it's not a great space to try and work in. So curious to hear your feedback on that. Is that something the JC think we should be indicating as a nominal connection in the future, or is it best to drop that off at this point?
Yeah, it's not something I think we've talked about, which I suppose is a good thing that you bring us ideas we haven't considered. Right, that's what this process is all about.
Yep.
Yeah, obviously sensitive habitat there. When we say there was a historical connection, was that some sort of footbridge
Was it
or
causeway,
The cool.
sort of affected by the tide?
what was it, like a floating?
Causeway is sort of it's pretty old. You
Right.
can see remnants
Yeah,
of
there's
it.
still remnants of it there, so it's whether you
Okay.
want, there's the opportunity to activate it, and I think it goes to that some of the quarter we've had with TPN around yes, there's a site, but actually what's that wider connection?
I mean, from my perspective, I don't know what the committee thinks, but from my perspective, I think if there's been something there before, could we leave it on the plan for discussion as part of all the consultation and see what all the partners and all the community think about it? I'm sure there would be some quite big hurdles in terms of consenting and things like that for structures in such a sensitive area. But yeah, so
That causeway that goes there, isn't that section of land had now been changed from conservation to airport zone in one of the last lots of planning, or is that further down? My understanding that there was an application to change it from conservation to airport zone.
the actual causeway.
No, the land that causeway would, if you had a walkway when you got over the other side, I thought that was changed in the last district plan, not this one, to airport zone. Or am I thinking of another area?
I think you might. Yeah, I think you might be
Yeah.
thinking of the airport overlay. The district plan couldn't change the zoning structure as such
I'd
of
have to look
that
at
land.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's all something that could be explored if through consultation there was a desire to see some sort of connection. The land on the other side, is that
That's what I
Pamu
mean. Yeah.
or is that airport?
That's what I mean. The other side, was that changed to airport zone?
Do you mean the ownership of it?
Well, the zoning of it.
We don't zone an airport or dock. It's ownership that determines whose it
I'll
is.
have to find all my
Yeah.
notes and then maybe.
Can I suggest that if that goes in, which I'm quite happy for it to stay in unless there's any objections for comment and consultation, that we just firm up the answer to some of those questions around whose land we would be connecting into, and if we connected into that, where you'd go from there, because you obviously don't want a bridge to nowhere.
A bit of history on it. When the council wrote their original master plan in 2018, there was a cycle track, walk track, dog walking track all along that side. And we talked with Fleur, and I think others did too, and they dropped that off because of all the restoration work for bitters that's been done in the upper estuary.
Yeah, you certainly don't want pedestrian access coming up the left-hand side where all that bittern work is, but if it's connecting back in to the right, to, back into Bayview area, that would be the only logical pathway, I would see, from going across. Yeah, a little bit more maybe work if we're going to include that.
Yeah, and that's what we want to try start teasing out today is, where do we want those cycling? Do we want dogs in this space at all?
No.
So, yeah, all of those questions, starting to tease out.
Maybe-
Chat.
I was just thinking it'd be good to get a site visit and as part of the workshop and as a team, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's schedule that maybe, and we're probably a couple months away from our next committee meeting. Maybe if we could put a date in for a site visit next time master plan teams around, maybe could be a good idea.
Right.
Gabe, did I
Hey.
cut you off there? Sorry.
Yeah, so I was going to say, while we've got this on screen, there was some discussion previously around potential predator fencing as part of the project to create a wildlife sanctuary. So you can see the red line, which is sketched through this program plan, and then referencing out some of the potential predator fencing options out there. So keen to get a bit of feedback from your perspective about, is this something we really want to try and keep in the mix as we progress? There's different ways of doing it, from either like a traditional tall fence, which obviously causes a bit of challenge in terms of trying to create good accessibility for the public to use some of these spaces. There are some recent examples with ZIP, Zero Invasive Predator organization, trialing relatively low ones, which are still, I think they've worked out about 95% effective, the way of creating a bit of a sanctuary without having to have such tall, expensive fencing. And then there's also trap networks, which are increasingly becoming monitored and smart. So there's a way you could create a virtual boundary around it. But if anyone has any initial feedback on whether that's something we want to keep in the mix, it'd be great to know.
I suppose the matter of doing costing on there, I know we're looking at one up in Taupo, which I sit on that predator-proof fencing, and we've been looking at that for a number of years. I suppose that it'll potentially come down budget, because that is really expensive. So hey, I'm all for it, but I suppose just what is the budget set, and what so you'd need to do put some figures in there forward to make sure it's really, I mean, it's achievable. Like I think we'd all want a predator-proof fence.
I think the approach we'd probably take is, if it's something that was a degree of support, then we'd make sure the design accommodates the space for it. And then whether or not it actually happens down the track would be something that has to be worked through and business cases worked out.
Yeah, because I think if you're looking at the bird life and the different types of species in that, and what you're trying to put within their environment, obviously that's a key to supporting that habitat, because kaka and other tui and all those nesting birds and that, obviously I suppose cats would be having a huge impact on that area. So you'd most surely want to keep them out. So when you're looking at your long-term planning and your vision and your goals, obviously that's got to be incorporated into the design, because I think I mentioned earlier, it's no point saying you're going to do this when you haven't done that. So that'll impact. So I'm for it, but it's just you'd have to plan that out.
Yeah.
So,
Just as a sidebar to that, the new housing estates over by the issue, by Prevention Drive, is there any rules in there about cat number, how many cats, because there are some subdivisions now being built around the country where if they're close to sensitive areas, they're not allowing the residents to have cats.
yeah, no, there isn't any rules around cats in the urban napier environment. It is something we've looked at. Basically, it comes down to, we don't have a piece of legislation like the Dog Control Act that allows us to put effective bylaws in place. And then obviously you don't have enforcement regimes, legislation that supports you in enforcement, and you also don't have a way to recover the cost of providing that activity. So we're at a little bit of a impasse, I guess, and there's a number of councils who have introduced cat bylaws like what you're talking about, and have then had to roll them back and remove them as well because of those overarching legislative issues. So I understand consecutive governments have talked about it, but until we get a piece of legislation, it's really difficult to
Because my
enforce.
understanding in some suburb, new subdivisions, the developer has the right to say, okay, you're not allowed to paint your house pink with green
covenants.
polka dots. You must put your gardens in at a certain time. I have my sister's friend, they were not allowed to put gnomes in their garden, so she put one in her front window instead. But anyway, so there are avenues to think. See, I have a cat. I love my cat, but if I lived over by the estuary, I wouldn't have a cat because I know thing, but then not everybody thinks my way. I don't want my cat
It is-
catching any bird,
yeah.
whether it's a sparrow or a pigeon. but,
It is something we have looked
Yeah.
at and will continue to look at, but I think the position council's got to is we do need a piece of supporting legislation. Yeah.
There's nothing that prevents a developer putting those covenants into the development if that's what they wish, and that's enforceable then by the body corporate or whatever subdivision. So if the developer had that sort of will.
They could do that. Thank you. Gabe, can I just ask a question as we're working through? One of the consistent themes in the Strawman designs are the stormwater attenuation area, so the storage zone is
Yep.
consistently in that top left sort of lowest point.
Yes.
Can I just, I'm keen to tease that out because that surprised me, only because in my absolutely non-engineering technical mind, I thought the storage area would be at the highest point and would then allow for the trickle down through the wetland system to the lowest point where it would be discharged. So
So I guess there's two different components. There's the stormwater detention area, which is to basically capture the very high storm flows and relieve pressure on the wider network. So that's basically a volume thing. So that makes the most sense, I guess. And this is taking guidance from the Becky document to put that in the lowest part of the site. So there's less construction needed, earthworks needed. You've already got a natural basin to collect a lot of that. So that drives that stormwater detention to that, I guess, that north western end of the site. And then the other component is the wetland treatment zones, which are the three cells. One's tied to the Taipo, one's to the Piramu, and then I can't remember what the third one's called, OTB, I think it is. So they initial discussions is they may actually be somewhat independent from the stormwater detention area, and they may actually be built up on top of the existing grade because you've got such low or high groundwater there, and the cost of excavation might make it quite difficult to achieve. So the wetlands, I guess there might be some flexibility on where they will sit, but I think the stormwater detention area will probably have to logically sit in that corner of the site because it is the lowest point. Obviously, if you have to start excavating some of the higher parts of the site to form that, you've got a whole lot more challenges. There was discussion around, well, and I think my understanding is so far that when the water is collected in there, then that would have to be gradually pumped out to the estuary as you can. There was some talk about some siphon pump systems which don't need power that might be able to be investigated, but that's all questions that we'll have to rely on the engineering team once they're engaged to start feeding into the design process.
yeah, thank you. Acknowledging there's a whole lot of technical work in there. So just dumb it down for me. So we've got the channels that will bring the stormwater from the different catchments within the city, and I'm being advised OTRB is the old Tutaikuri riverbed catchment within the city. So we've got them flowing in from sort of the eastern and the southern part of the park. They flow into the wetland area, get treated in a series of wetlands, and then pumped into.
That's my
or is this all
understanding.
yet to be? Yeah, and so the water that goes into the stormwater storage zone, the intention of that is that it still goes through the wetland treatment system once there is capacity in the wetland treatment system to cater for it.
Yeah, so I think in a big storm event, it would bypass the wetlands because they just wouldn't have the capacity to deal with it. And then as soon as the flood events pass, then the wetlands would be resuming their normal function. So that's what those green channels you can see on the screen are. So there would have to be some sort of control structures on the Taipo and the Piramu, which would basically divert those floodwaters through the site to that low point. But
I think that's the key difference between what my thinking was. I thought that the attenuation space would be upstream, essentially, of the wetland system so that after the flood event had passed and your attenuation space is full, it can slowly trickle into normal flows or augment normal flows into the wetland system.
If I
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to come join us at the table because we've got some online?
Yeah, I think we don't know all the details, right? But I think the intent is, and what's probably not getting across is during a high rain event, like a real heavy rain event, pumping's not necessarily the best option. So you want to pick the lowest lying areas so that gravity flows, so it flows by gravity to the lowest lying area. Part of our design is kind of indicated that that stored water would be returned back to the process.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So does that help a little?
Yeah, thank you. I think
So
that
once
was
the wetlands have come back to normal and the event is finished, we would pump water from storage back through the treatment process, so it would be treated.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was trying to get straight in my mind. If it's at the lowest point, how does it get back up to the top of the treatment system? But there'd be a pump process.
But it would be a slower pumping process.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need, wouldn't need huge pumps to pump it. It would just be a gradual process, but a very infrequent one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Feel free to stay, Phil.
Maybe if we go back to those strawmen, I guess one of the key questions is what is the JC group's general thoughts around, do we hold the existing line of the shoreline, or do we try to be a bit more ambitious and look at some selected stop bank retreat? Bearing in mind that, again, there's a pretty big cost implication when you start moving stop banks around. So that would be budget that we're putting towards giving more room for the estuary, but that reduces the amount we've got to invest within the site potentially. So keen to know what the wider group's thoughts are on that.
I think, because I see Shaden that's on the technical group, and I think Ngāi has released a paper in relation to, and I think he had that, and he had discussed this with Ngāi Tahu in relation to letting natural flow, and they talk about constrained riverbanks. I know they've talked about it at the regional council and that. So, yeah, you would have had a conversation with them in regards to natural flow of rivers and letting them breathe, I think they say, and widen. So how does that fit into your planning? Because I know they've obviously had those conversations with HBRC in regards to river flows to Tutaukiri and the Ngāraro, and how people have overbuilt in areas that shouldn't have been built on. So yeah, so when you talk about confining stop banks,
so that's a room for river concept is what they term that. I guess that would have to take a bit more of a comprehensive look at the wider catchment, because you obviously got stop bank protection right along the channel, right up to the headwaters towards the Esk Valley there. And I think the effect that this will have on the overall capacity of the channel is probably going to be fairly limited based on my layman's knowledge. Certainly when we talked about it at TAG, the folks from the Hawke's Bay Regional Council didn't seem to be too worried by it, other than making sure we're aware that there's a pretty big cost implication if you start to move those. So I don't know if that retreating it back like we're showing on here would provide a meaningful increase in stormwater capacity for the channel. So it's probably more around the cultural and ecological benefits of potentially making that move.
Yeah, and just in stop banks and your planning and that, because we're all aware of global warming and impacts and that, and weather events, and then high volumes of water coming through, because I think that's been suggested in I read a report, and it's about the volume of rain that comes through. It's not going to be a long event. It's going to be a short term with a lot of rain, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but because you'd be looking at high volumes of water in a shorter time frame, rather than sometimes you think it's going to be all this water over a week, but it's not. It's going to be, I think the modelling's around short term, so a huge dump of water in that area. And how do we, just coming through cycling Gabriel, I suppose you'll be putting that into all the engineering and the planning documentation about putting this modelling up, and a huge amount of water's in that area. And then, yeah, I suppose what does it wipe out? Does it wipe out if, with the changes that we make? I don't know, just trying to get my head around it.
I think the context is that in laying out the location and size of the attenuation and treatment facilities, which is sort of the primary purpose, and then when we turn our attention to ecological enhancement and so on, is really direction as to whether this is a tool that should be considered, noting that it comes with quite a significant cost, and how far should the design team turn their mind to it. I guess one option is just to recognise the existing stop bank and look at ecological improvement options around that, or have an ability to soften it in a minor way, or whether this is something which is really felt to be a key opportunity and give more effort and more investment to softening it further. So it's just that we're on the spectrum, I think, with the committee, like the design team to be thinking.
Because I know it's not a stop back thing, but I know some of the corridor we've got back from whānau to mana Ahuriri and to iwi hapu is about when, and it may not directly impact within this project, but it's around the pollution. And obviously, that we talk about mahi and kai and then that, and then them getting notices that they can't, do the Māori in the estuary in that bottom part because it's highly polluted, or they can't gather kaimoana out the entrance because it's highly polluted. So, just so that water quality within that framework is actually quite important, because it's constantly raised. There's a question: hey, what are you doing about the water quality within the estuary? And I know birds and all that, what they do and their business, and that adds to all that. So, we're just looking at those wider conversations that we generally have with a lot of our whānau that are, obviously that pātaka kai is always an important part, and they're constantly being told, hey, don't get anything from there because you're going to get sick. So, in the wider planning, if that has any impact, because that's every year that question's asked,
Well,
just so you're aware.
I think in terms of answering that question to whānau going forward, this is the project that you talk about, because this is the first time that Napier's looking at treating what is 75% of its pumped stormwater through a natural process, a wetland treatment system to sort of strip out some of those contaminants and play its role, like you say, acknowledging there's other natural contaminants in that water because it doesn't move a lot sometimes as well. But in terms of the city's contamination on stormwater, this is the solution.
Andy's got a question.
So that will be built into so all I'm saying. So and with that comment, I could say that in confidence that we're going to this plan that we're putting forward is going to help resolve some of those issues. So
Absolutely, that's the purpose of the wetland treatment component of the project. When we're talking about softening of the stop bank, that's more about what tools are there and how many tools to what extent should be used to improve ecological values. Is that?
Yeah. I'll just, I've got Councillor Brown with a question, but I'll just add my little thought as well to that stop bank question. I think, my starting position is that we should work with the existing stop bank unless we can show significant benefit in moving or changing it. So my key concern around moving or changing it is the introduction of the tube worm into the park, and I know that it's halfway up the typo anyway, moving back towards Park Island. So that's a key risk, I suppose, to me towards softening that edge in particular. But starting position of probably working within the existing stop banks, unless we can show, probably through the tag group, a recommendation that we do something differently in that space because we will achieve, X, Y, Z. Councillor Brown.
Kia ora, everybody. Sorry, I'm home with the lurgy and I didn't want to spread my germs with you, so I'm listening in.
Thank you for that.
Basically, Annette said what I was about to say. I think it's around, because other than aesthetics, what would changing the stop bank achieve? And if it is going to massively improve ecological outcomes or any of the things that we've got as our key objectives, then that's great. But if something else can do it better for the money and the investment that's required, then I suppose we sort of need a little bit of that analysis at a high level to be able to say.
Yeah, I think the process I think we'll probably take is as soon as we get the engineers on board, because first priority is to treat that water that's coming into the site, and if they need a certain amount of area to accomplish that, then we can't be compromising that with potential stop bank movements. And I think once we get that answer, then we can have a closer look through the TAG team about what would be the benefits of that potential shift. And I think one of the things we will go back to the regional council is just to get a bit of clarification from them about, in the existing configuration, what is the anticipated lifespan of those given sea level rise and things like that? Is this something which is this infrastructure, is this good for the next 50 to 100 years as is, or are they looking at having to upgrade or change it in the next 20 to 50 years anyway? So I think those questions we'll work to tease out and try to come back with a bit more of a robust analysis of pros or cons for doing that.
Cool. Just as you were introducing them, I wrote down a couple of notes as well. I think it's a big yes to me for the entrance off Prebenson Drive, if possible. I think that makes a lot of sense to use that existing roundabout. I know when that was built, obviously the intention was this land was industrial land, but it was built with the purpose in mind of an additional road corridor coming off that. So in terms of cost, it would be really effective to produce the entrance into the park off that existing roundabout, and obviously that has less impact on traffic flows as well if we're using that existing intersection, so that makes sense to me. I really like the estuary islands idea, but acknowledging that that corridor around the stop bank. I see what TAG has said around the amphitheatre. I think if there's space for it, I really like that idea. I like the idea if we can appropriately engage people in the kaupapa of the park through, community low impact events that don't impact on obviously our key po around habitat and things like that, then that's a really positive use. And I'd just like to acknowledge that we have a little bit of obviously bias in the TAG group towards, some of those other outcomes, and we don't necessarily have someone in there from, say, the community and event space. We've stacked our TAG group with what we're looking at the moment, which are those engineering expertise and things like that. So acknowledging it may not be their priority, but I think part of what we've gone out to achieve with the park is as much participation as possible, and that suggestion came from the community engagement coordinator as well at council, as identifying a need. So I'd like to see that sort of stay in for discussion with the community as it works through the consultation stages.
So just to clarify, that might be a matter that we're recognising the TAG's role is to provide advice on the where and the how, maybe not necessarily the what.
Yeah, I'm happy. I think it's a healthy tension, for them to push back on things like this. I'm not upset about it, but I do just acknowledging, I think, there is a converse side to that discussion. Yeah.
Well, they could be proposing potential opportunities. Are we encouraging pedestrians or the locals to occupy the space, or with the creation of wetlands in Waitangi, the purpose of that was to increase habitats to bring certain birds back, and so we purposely didn't put footpaths around there so we didn't encourage the pedestrians to go there.
I think
is that a goal or
Yeah, I think Chad raises a really good korero to be had. So I think in the strawmen, am I correct in thinking the orange lines are suggested sort of access pathways? And you've got a mix, if I'm correct, you have got a mix of sort of more and less pedestrian or public access throughout the park. I agree with what I think you're saying, Councillor Tariha, the less, it's striking the right balance, right? You want people to engage with the park and understand how special, like I was saying to Peter before, you could stand somewhere in the park and you've got, the biggest estuary in the southern hemisphere over here, and you've got probably the biggest wetland treatment system of stormwater in the country on this side. And so giving people access to understand how special that is important, but the protection of the habitat is also really important. So I quite like the Ripo Nui lines of connection, where you've got some connection, say up to a viewing point and back into the roading corridor between the entrance hub, something of that kind of nature, with those orange lines, but not as intensive as what you see in the Ahuriri one. So, really keen on the committee's view on how extensive that interaction with pedestrians should be. Do you want to make further comment on that? You think less is more?
So the purpose of the park was to treat the water, but then we can also incorporate enhancing habitat and stuff like that. Did that come after we decided that the purpose was to treat the water first, and then we have this opportunity now? So I'm on the fence. I'm either. I'm just, what was the purpose of the thing in the first place, and but yeah, I'm all for enhancing habitat and increasing biodiversity. This could be a real good opportunity to do that, and I just see a lot of potential in this, and we can do a lot of things with it, actually.
I think once we start refining the design further, once we understand a lot of that technical aspects, then we can start exploring, where are those places that, we want to welcome and exclude. I think part of our kōrero last week with TAG, we talked about, are there areas that are prohibited? Are there areas that are, mana whenua have, those rights to? Are there areas like that? So I think that's all part of the kōrero. Certainly are there opportunities as part of those trails, to bring back that storytelling, those pūrākau, are there cultural trails, are there ecological trails? So, thinking in that bigger sense. But again, once we start understanding how this treatment works and where those spaces are, then we can start applying those ideas around, where do we want those trails to form and work through.
Yeah, I think you're right, and there will be a different thresholds of access. For instance, I quite like the idea you've identified in there around agriculture pods and nurseries. That would, I imagine, not be a space that everyone would have access to, if that something like that was to be built in. And so, being really purposeful around where your storytelling, and I like the concept you just said there around different types of trails. There's some cultural storytelling, or some ecological or some habitat sort of specific trails that you could go on. I think that makes a lot of sense, and but from my perspective, I definitely think there will be some areas where no access is absolutely okay.
May I ask a question? Yeah, I don't. I meant to say through the chair. Is that?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with that. How does this all affect the freshwater flow going into the estuary now from the various outlets? If all stormwater is running into this storage thing?
So there's a piece of work that we've just engaged, gone out, you might have heard in the meeting that we've procured some engineering design work to design how the stormwater will come in and out of the park. So it's not at a stage where where all the inflows and the outflows are mapped yet, but it will likely replace some of the existing outfall areas that we have, or some of the existing discharge points that we have. And you're probably aware, as part of our discharge consent, we're required to investigate stormwater treatment through a wetland system. So this type of treatment system is intended in our resource consent as well, and any change to those discharge points would go through a regional council consenting process as well. It's probably at the stage where we're at.
There was a comment before that if there's any 4-lane highway, it won't affect, but I don't think that's correct, because it'll go straight from that roundabout through to Watchman Road, which is right on the edge of your property. So just flagging that thought.
Yeah, that might be something we could ask a question about. I don't think we've been advised of any intended roading designation or anything like that. And I haven't seen the 4-laning conversation in any great detail at council yet either, so I'm not sure what stage it's at, but we'll make sure the project team are aware to ask the question.
Katie's made a few comments.
I know about the 4-laning of the expressway, but I don't know at what
I've
point.
seen it written somewhere up to Watchman Road.
Right.
There is on the constraints mapping, we've got a sheet, a little diagram which shows the designations over the site. So there is a little portion of highway designation that sits over the, yep, that's the one. So I think, Connie, you were going to follow up and try and find out a bit more information about what that means, if anything, to us.
Yeah, we've had some in our district. Sorry, yes, I can provide a better update at the next meeting to provide some clarity to it, but just a bit of context for our district plan submissions. They've looked to refine that highway corridor, which is a good suggestion that they're not considering to include it.
Cool. If we could include that in our update to next committee with a bit more information, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Angie. And just while I still have the floor, the other note I like was, yes, I like the intention for some low predator proof fencing, whether that's, in part, but certainly keen to see that included in the concept for the community consultation, and keen if it makes its way through. It's always something that could potentially be staged into the park. It may not be stage one, but allowing for it in future, I think, is a good idea.
Right.
So I think just on that, see on the screen at the moment, I think it'd be good to get an idea if there's anything from the wider rōpū around, if there's any concerns on some of these things, if there's the things that are, more significant than others. Great to start to tease, some of these ideas and what might best work. So.
And I guess a key part of that, Will, is the economic prosperity. I think, as I mentioned previously, there is going to be a fair bit of potential residual land, which we could design with coastal forest or shrubland or whatever we like. But if there is an interest to look at other programs or built forms or activities that might be complementary to the park, I mean, we'd certainly be keen to know. Got a sample of those in there. Maybe you can just quickly run through those, Will.
Yeah, I think that's what we had as one of our next steps was once we start exploring, once we've done the wetland, all of these things, that land left over, what might those opportunities be? So as you see there, that these are just some of the ideas of those economic opportunities. Do we retain, the blow carts there? Are there other opportunities for recreational activities? Can we produce kai here? As the opportunity to harvest, as the opportunities for cafe or restaurant, those sorts of things. Energy production, could we do that here? Solar, wind, bioenergy could even be, water as well, if that's what we see, potentially, water-based activities. So these are just all ideas that would be good just to get some thoughts around, what's going to sit nicely with, we talk about the whole restoration, water quality, what some of these economic opportunities would sit nicely with that or support that, but also the activation and cultivation as well.
I suppose from a mana whenua perspective, we'd be keen on a cultural hub, obviously, and aspiring to some of those values and aspirations in regards to, what we said earlier around kaitiakitanga and our values and principles and that. So be very supportive of cultural hub. Obviously, and there'd be a wider conversation, I suppose, with the board in there then, because obviously then you need to look at budgets and bits and bobs and where you fit within in that process. But and whether it's a decision with Ahuriri commercial board to tease that out, but we'd raise that with them and then go through the metrics of budget and costs and what's achievable. And I think we started off right at the start by talking about what can you that's a built up area, I think someone mentioned in that area, and then what can you do? Need to actually get just a bit more information
regarding the cultural hub. So there's going to be the Waka hub just further upstream, which could be a multi-purpose cultural club, and but it is might be able to get access to Waka Taurua up in there. Just thinking, because spending a bit on the Waka hub, just not too far from this area, might be. Won't need to duplicate the facilities. But I was going to mention Waka access into that area as well. Also, because with the Mission Estate Winery, also proposing to construct the wetlands just further, just upstream from the tide pool, which surrounds the park here, might be beneficial to touch base with them as well. There might be some benefits to both working together, because they will have to flow their stormwater. Well, I think that was part of their resource consent, was to establish a wetland for their stormwater to run through before it discharges into the estuary.
Is that from the I'm not sure what they're calling it now, the Emerald Hills area, or is it their site further down?
So that was, I'm sure it's part of the the Emerald Hills, but also they're looking to incorporate it into their current proposal. So I think it's for both.
Very good.
On the economic side, I'm just sort of conscious that the master plan, given that it's going to be kind of probably prepared over the next 4 to 6 months, it's unlikely that we'll get to the level of detail to sort of provide for specific activities, if there were any to be provided for. Is it more of a case of providing the opportunity rather than providing the what?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think when we talk, I would probably like to see us less use terms like cultural hub or because I agree. I don't think we necessarily in our master planning should say, look, here's a space where you could set up and deliver some services. I think if we're more generic and we say hub, because I'm conscious, in the back of my mind, I've got that the Department of Conservation used to have a public-facing side locally that they don't have at the moment, and maybe there's some more sort of generic education space that anyone could use, or display space, or maybe there's some cultural tourism opportunities or ecotourism or something like that. And so if we just kept it more generic at our planning level, that allows whichever party may be in a position to use the space to do that.
Like zoning? Zoning the park?
Yeah.
And I think that'll be part of that leftover land, be highlighting as part of that consultation. This is what's been explored, whether it is, the ecotourism, tourism. If it's a hub, those will be the amenities within that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we may be able to set aside some leasable space that someone might want to come on and develop a hub or a hospitality offering to support a hub or something like that. If it was inside this space that we, as Chad said, designate for complementary commercial activities. Yeah.
And I think the nature of this sort of project is that that space is going to be where it's going to be as a result or as an influence of providing for the other project priorities anyway.
Yeah, it's a byproduct of...
Yeah, so it's not as if it needs to be, I guess, considered in super detail in terms of where it should be. It'll be where it will be.
How does
I guess so I was going to say, so I guess for the purposes of the master plan, we can clearly identify where the entry is. Maybe there's a focal point, which is not fully defined, but that may be where the hub, center of the hub is, but then we could have a residual area which is just nominated for future consideration.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the wording you've used, the complementary commercial, or that summarizes perfectly probably what the level of detail I think we need.
Kia ora, can I just add to that kōrero, please?
Of course.
Yeah. I think I support that approach, obviously, and we've been guiding the team. Our team's been having discussions around what level of detail do you get into, and just probably passing on experience of another similar sized park, open space that had a road corridor running through the edge of it up here in Tauranga. We started with a mana whenua-led concept, and that came up with a whole lot of ideas around cultural centres and re-establishing themselves back in that particular valley. Those things, it's been 20 years since that project began, underway, established, the concept was established, a trust was formed, the funding came in, and ideas have evolved over time, but the principles have remained true throughout that. So it's creating a master plan that has the ability to endure a long period of time. And if you get into a point where you're quite specific on those outcomes, i.e. cultural centre or those sorts of things, that might change and evolve over time. So it's just, I support the kōrero that's been happening just now around having that flexibility in there to talk about, that leads back to those principles of what the primary purpose and outcomes are for the park. So I think it gives you an adaptive and flexible master plan that can be responsive but also guiding for any ideas that may come up in 10 years or 20 years time.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think there's lots of great ideas in there. The textiles, the mahi toi. If we talk more generically around hubs, I think that covers, our cultural hub, our ecotourism space, and our conference venue space. It's probably not as specific as cultural venues. It's just meetings, meeting space potentially, or gathering space. Research facilities one is interesting. I don't know what the committee thinks about. I mean, you're looking at building quite probably bigger structures once you start talking about.
It might be part of the hub.
Yeah.
I think, just with the estuary there, whether there's that educational side of things, as part of research, think about the tube worm, those concerns there, could that be part of that research, that R&D, understanding whether there's that focus on te taiao, research opportunity for, PhDs, whatever that might be,
Well, let's leave it in, is my thinking, and have a conversation, probably with EIT and Tai Whenua around whether or not, they see a future for that space, because it's probably something you'd need to partner with in terms of funding
and I think
early on.
Be more around partnerships than actually something physical.
Yeah.
And the structure might be those partnerships connected to it.
Just on about the tube room, when you're going to have the outflow from the treated water, would there be a consideration of some of that water going through the Taipo stream itself? Or where would the outflow go? Just so how people because of the tube, they're like salty water, not
Yeah.
fresh water.
Mm.
And so is there to consider some of that overflow going through the type wall to help eradicate the tube room from the stream?
I think that'll be part of the that set of works for that once we start getting to that design of things for the treatment ponds and that. I think that will be where we bring that conversation.
But it's a good point to make, not just excluding the tube worm as a constraint, but is there a mitigation we could help to its growth as well in the wider estuarine environment?
I think Gabe had explored the concept of whether you can reuse the tube worm for like building blocks. So it could be a whole whether you could do that. I think he's got here just a form of it.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Could you use that as material on site? Could be something. But again, research and kind of R&D around it. But
I think as part of your, education kaupapa on site, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, thinking big, what could be done as part of that?
Use your resources.
Yeah.
Have you talked to the regional council about that? Because they had a big report done by Cawthron Institute with all the possibilities for what could be done for the tube worm, and the last I knew of it, that report was being referred to their biosecurity team to make a decision. But I haven't heard anything further.
Who was that through again?
Cawthron Institute, they're in Nelson, I think.
And we do have Anna Madara-Smith, who led that piece of work. Her replacement, I think, is called Becky, and she's joined the technical advisory group, so she'll be
she'll be up with that.
Yeah, hopefully the best conduit for getting that into the tag group.
One thing I notice is the word passive has dropped off the recreational activities, which was in your early plans, passive recreation. So it's getting quite ambitious. I mean, where were these things like water sports pictured? Is it on the big stormwater retention thing, or is it?
I think it's to be explored further. I mean, these are just pulling out ideas, what you could do, or potential.
Yeah, so we're just at the stage, this is the first time the committee's seeing these, and these are ideas that the master plans team is putting to us. So they're not our plans, they are suggestions for us to discuss. So we can do that one now, the recreational activities. I think the comment around passive recreation is being pretty consistent so far on what we want to achieve on the park. And I think, passive recreation and gathering spaces that are complementary to the space they're in on the park. So away from habitat and stuff like that, if we do have gathering spaces is sort of where we've been so far. I'm interested, I guess the master plan team are challenging us with this question around, do we want to have any or explore any other things like horse riding? We had the comment around potential waka access, which I think is a good one to explore. Playgrounds, skate parks, basketball, those sorts of questions. Any desire?
I'm open to everything. Just
I think, just if I can butt in, sorry, we've had some pretty good feedback from TAG that is like, don't do that. So we're bringing it here to test the idea. Are we correct in saying, yeah, let's not do skateboarding park?
Yeah.
Making sure that thinking is the vision of this committee too.
I suppose that comes back to your vision, your principles and all that. And we've talked about it earlier, just about the habitat and that. So just where, I suppose it's prioritising where those sit within the framework, so we can say, well, we want this good breeding ground for birds, and you mostly want to have a jet boat racing up there with you. Yeah, what I mean? So just putting it into in some kind of context to make sure.
Passive recreation,
Yeah. So I think we all sound relatively on the same page, where passive recreation only, complementary gathering spaces, waka access to be explored.
Education.
The word passive, though, can mean different things to different people. That's why I think we have to be careful and clear passive means walking and things like that, because as I said, we had the jet ski people come to talk to us way back. They thought that was passive because they just sat on the jet ski and they didn't understand why they couldn't go up and down the estuary. And I said, well, it's a wildlife reserve, so we're not going anywhere near the birds. You know, so it needs to, and I know that originally when this concept was set up, you said Ahuriri Regional Park because you didn't know what else to call it. And as soon as you say regional park, people think park, playgrounds, this, that, and the other. So words can be important.
All right. Let's make sure we talk walking, cycling when we talk passive. Yeah. You carry on, Rebecca.
I'm just gonna add to that, just as a means of making clear like the type of cycling, because cycling has active recreation tones as well to that, i.e. BMX, mountain biking, those sorts of things. So just it's really clear that it's passive recreational cycling, and I think that alludes back to that hierarchy of how we prioritise space here. Some areas where there's no access, some areas where there is recreation access, because again, an example of one here where the project started out as a full restoration, bringing cultural presence, hape presence back into a place, and over time, over the 20 sort of year period, it has evolved into some of the driving funding avenues for the project have been from walking and cycling funds. So they then suddenly become prioritised. So it's just making really clear in the outset of this project that you know, that hierarchy, because some of the funding avenues may start to push those and push some tension on your principles. So that's just, yeah, we've just got to test that as we go through this master plan project, because that'll feed into your your reserve management plans that will follow on from this stage of works.
Yeah.
One thing I'm just curious to tease out. So when we talked about some play strategies, quite interested to see if we could try to embed a sort of permission to play in the wider park as well. A really good way to get people to engage in the natural environment is provide those moments where they can interact with natural elements and like water and timber and whenua. Do you think in select areas that might be something we can try to pitch some little play nodes that might be, maybe it's centralized around the central hub, or maybe there's some areas which are selected in the wider park as well, which could also talk to some of the cultural storytelling and narratives? These are some examples of, there's actually Will in one of his creations looking at some marahapua type strategies, sort of Māori play opportunities, and some of them could be very small scale and sensitive, others can be sort of destination playgrounds and things like that. Is that something you've got any thoughts on for us?
Keen to explore it.
Yeah, if you get the public engaged in positive activity, I think was the positive. Yeah, and if they can get some education out of the activity they're doing, it's a bonus.
Cool. I think a general feedback there around keen to see it stay in and explore what that could look like. I'm kind of in two minds about it. I think the last thing we want is a drive to destination playground. So it would be more as people were using the passive recreational pathways, there were stop and play areas rather than necessarily a destination that someone would want to, pop all the kids in the car and drive down to. Yep. I want that destination to be the start of the walkway as such, more than the playground. So complementary is probably the word there. And also it'd be nice to make whatever our pedestrian experience, that be interesting enough in itself that we didn't have to create stop and play areas for families to get enjoyment out of the space. So the way that we design the pathways or the board, like kids love walking through the start of the estuary now because there's some interesting boardwalks that go over some estuarine environments and water and stuff like that, which they always find really interesting. So whether or not there's other ways that we can create interest without building our playground as such. Yeah.
And it could be as simple as providing some areas where there is, some boulders for stepping down into or through some water. So I think you're exactly right. It could be just these incidental moments of interest along the pedestrian network that help to draw people through the site, rather than taking the whole whānau on a picnic and driving out to spend the day there.
It could be part of the storytelling opportunities as well. There's tech space now where you might use AR, augmented reality, to tell stories. That's quite a fun way for kids to get out, enjoy nature in those. So, there's that tech side of space you could explore as part of this.
I see Councillor Brown has her hand up.
Kia ora. You're really liking where that conversation's going and loving the this sort of, oh, hang on, someone's calling me. Go away. I don't even know how to, I'll just ignore it. Just thinking, when you were talking about recreation and we sort of limited it to walking and cycling, I imagine it to be quite a peaceful place. And so I was thinking if there was spaces for things like yoga groups or Tai Chi or something like that, I felt like that might be quite symbiotic to fit in there too. That's all.
Yeah, I think that definitely within the idea of this hub, whatever form or shape that took, there's definitely opportunity for things like that to be part of that.
Just a question.
I assume it's just a piece of flat land with a nice view. So, yeah.
Although we'll have aeroplanes going overhead periodically.
Peter.
I just had a question just in regards to the walking and cycle. How would that work? Cycleways, walkways, and then a lot of people got more people biking on e-bikes now and all that kind of. So how do you have any idea how that would work within the park? Yeah, I mean, you just get kids walking along, then you get someone coming along on, or 4 or 5 people coming along. They're starting riding groups now and all on e-bikes or whatever. And just wondering if you thought about how that would.
I think once we start exploring that design side of things, we might be able to allocate. We might have a main path that's say 3 meters wide, and you might have more those intimate trails that's more walking for families, excluding the cycling. So yeah, it'll be just finding the balance. I think once we get there.
I think there'll be a definite hierarchy that we'll look to map through the site, and we've obviously got the existing connections that are really well used. You see people on the e-bikes cruising along there at high speed all the time. So I think it would be really important to make sure we've carefully considered where we do want to have that slower, more pedestrian orientated versus the sort of shared space.
So
very quickly, just on the cycleway pathways, I know nothing's set in concrete and just discussing ideas, but bear with, there's a walkway at the estuary from the end of Humber Street, most of you know, up to there. It's a walkway. It's a walkway, but every cyclist think, no, it's a path. I should be able to go on it.
Yeah,
so I think to stop any confusion, not having that sort of facility in the park as a priority might be the best way to go and monitor and look. I'm all for people getting out into the into nature and enjoying the things, but the trouble is it can cause other issues without it being thought of. And every path, every footpath, the cyclists think they've been built for them.
I think we need to build paths that accommodate cycle and pedestrian appropriately, so the right size and clear from the get-go.
And we've done that on other projects. There's been specific parts allocated for cycling, and then those that are just specific for pedestrian. So yeah, it'll just be finding that balance between where we put the cycling and we put the pedestrian.
And just quickly out of the blue, 70% of the stormwater goes into the estuary at this stage. Will this park cut that down even more? That other, that because as I've said in a submission before, 70% of New Zealand's Napier stormwater goes in, but that's a huge amount more than it was when it was 90% 30 years ago. So as the options to divert stormwater from even going into the estuary with this project?
No, the intention is to treat the stormwater that goes into the estuary.
To clean it
The
up.
percentage probably won't drop much.
Correct.
What is going. Right.
Yeah.
I can elaborate a little bit, not as part of this project. It's not identified as part of this project. Part of our wider master plan for stormwater is to potentially divert water to the ocean or via cross-country drain. So that is something we're working on. We'll be working on with our stormwater master plan, but it's not part of this project.
Well, as a conservation group, we don't like that either. You know, I mean, you've got to take the best of what you can get, but shifting a problem from the estuary is great for us, the Estuary Society, and people who use it. But is it better to be putting that same sort of rubbish out into the sea?
I'm an environmentalist, Sue, and I think the best solution for an urban city is to treat its stormwater.
Yeah.
Because
Well, you're on council, come on.
where do you think this project came from?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And just digging down a little bit deeper, so talking about volumes of the, and as the city expands and all these developments and that, has it got capacity to I don't know, I haven't looked at any figures, but I'm just wondering, has it got capacity to treat the expected developments that are proposed in the future? I don't know how forward thinking the planning went in regards to that, because it might go up to 120% in the future.
Yeah, we haven't designed it yet, so it's based on the urban footprint, the estimates of those areas, but we don't know.
So what we're going to get, just to add on to that, what we're going to get as a governance group is we're going to get a stormwater solution from the consultants, and there will, I imagine, as part of that, be some sizing, and some of that will be future proofing. So you'll have some options for this to cater for today, this to cater for so much percentage increase, and we'll then be able to make a decision around capacity, or at least future space in the master plan to allow for extension. Because the way I understand it is your wetlands can be quite temperamental. You don't want them too big to start with, and then you don't get the right water flow through them where they don't treat appropriately. You've sort of got to design for current capacity to get the best result out of the stormwater treatment. But our job will be to make sure that it is future-proofed enough in terms of the space we allow for growth of that wetland as well. So it's a good question.
I say a weeny bit. Really like the amphitheatre idea, but I'd move it further away from that southern marsh area.
Yeah.
And Matariki's become a sort of question, burning driftwood on the beach, the toxicity of that. Maybe something like an amphitheatre could be a centre for Matariki and activities there. And another thought, where are we? Oh yeah, the predator-proof fencing, of course, keen on that, because it will only benefit the estuary itself as well, less predators around.
One of the discussion points I think Peter raised earlier, we've got papakainga, ? As we move into healthy, sustainable community space.
Yes.
Happy to kick that off with, I'm struggling to find a space where I think it would work.
Parklands.
Yeah, it's probably more on the
Yeah,
park.
and very much while aware Ahuriri Trust, the development that's happening along Wharerangi Road. There's papakainga there, but whether there was, you could do that, but again, kind of taking guidance from
what
on that one. Yeah.
What do my mana whenua representatives think?
Well, it'd be nice, but
space.
Nice place to live.
Yeah.
When it's not flooding.
I'm not too sure. Actually, might have overflow and.
Yeah, and it's hard to make a comment. I don't discount anything, because all I say is till you got that size area in that, and it's potentially a no, but I'm just saying it's be good to, when you finally come back with the area that's usable, then you make a definite answer. But yeah, it's highly unlikely, but yeah, I'm just saying, just
because you can find a space then, as we've been talking about less intrusion into this.
so it's,
So is the view leave it in as we consult with Hapu, or is that raising expectations that we might provide a space that is unlikely?
Don't want to give it a hard no.
It might be just reorientating that around, what does kaitiakitanga look like from Hapu, whether it is something like a papakanga, if it's more that hub or something like that. That might be a way to tag or reorientate that corridor around. Just giving it a high level until we know what that space is, clearly what that space is.
It probably is more a question to put back to Hapu when we have those huias. If we have residual developable land, what activities do you think are compatible, and how as a Hapu do you want to engage in the park once knowing what the kaupapa is, I guess. Sort of more a question than a suggestion.
Fundamentally, though, you're going to pose the question to say whether there should be residential activity on the site. And a lot of what I've personally been hearing is that we're talking passive, we're talking naturalness. Is residential living consistent with those things? I think we've also got to be aware of all of the hazards on the site for residential. And I just think if you were to promote like a plan change for a residential zone, that would be quite difficult. So is the action to, I guess, bottom out that option before raising it as an option?
When it's presented to us, it could come with all those designations, and could have
risks,
no residential will cross it, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think Chad's right. I think we'll definitely get to that decision point at the end. So let's leave the box there, but let's rephrase it to those questions, and we can make a kind of informed decision with the outcome of those Hapu consultation once we're at a stage of refining the master plan. I think that makes sense.
And that'll also determine those commercial activities as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, what potential in those would be too.
Would you like a brief memo or something on residential constraints?
I don't want to single it out. I'd rather us look at it when we make those final place marker decisions in the master plan by including or excluding it. That's our decision point, I think. But I think from your perspective, it'd be good to have those clear.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like just to review is where the district plan zoning was going, and just truly understand some of those hazard constraints. Because it's one thing providing for recreation and commercial use, so to speak, versus residential.
Yeah,
it's quite a jump.
Yeah, and we can definitely have that conversation later on in the master plan sort of adoption space or refining space.
So leisurely, a bit of suited word than passive.
Yeah, leisure recreation.
Slow pace, slow impact.
Slow. We'll just say 60 pluses only, eh?
They're the fastest on the e-bikes.
Oh, they are the fastest on the e-bikes, yeah.
And I suppose a couple of points in regards to the planning is around that Pātaka Kai, that most probably because a lot of whānau harvest gets mullet and that down there in the estuary and that, and if we're talking about that tuna and that, so just where that fits within the plan, because obviously you want to build that resource up, and then if around that Pātaka Kai, if there's opportunity to provide that, then that will be great. And obviously you get clean water and all those other things up in the estuary, what we're trying to promote, then there may be opportunity to manage that in the future. So I think it would be most probably a good opportunity if we get there. Hey, might be within 50 or 100 years, but it'd be good to be working towards that as a milestone to measure as a KPI. The able to provide clean water, Chris, or whatever it may be. So the technical team or whoever may look at that, because when you the measurements, I suppose, and that was in that mana o Tawai when they looked at measures, because you've got to measure success of this maybe in 50 years time or 30 years time. They'll say, hey, there's more birds and there's more inanga or more whitebait or whatever it is. So if we can, but that could come under that framework in the Pātaka Kai and some measures in that, if that's potentially possible. And they're more malus in that. I don't know. There would have been a stock take done in regards to what's in the issue. I'm not I know some things that are in there, but I don't really understand just what the environment is. Like someone told me there's oysters up the top and all that, and if that's true, then great. Hey, so just getting understanding what's here now, potentially what was here in the past, and then how do we improve that, and then that may be all under that Pātaka Kai type process.
And that's a key question, challenge question we have put to the TAG group as a whole to help us identify what those key species are that have been there, could be there, what sort of environment do we need to allow for in the master plan to allow that.
If you link into anybody who's been involved in the eDNA water testing, they could answer those questions.
I think there's some real educational opportunities there as well. Like when Angie was speaking earlier about the bird box, can't remember what you called it, but I thought that kind of concept of creating spaces for people to sit and observe the environment they're in, I think is real, and probably part of that creating interesting parts of our exploration around the pathways is creating stop and stay and view and experience nature and creating the infrastructure for that to occur over water, on land, that sort of stuff.
And just the other thing, because I was supportive of the just getting some more information around the predator-proof fencing as well, because I just if we're talking about habitat and wildlife and all there, it just potentially they just need more information in regards to what's possible.
I think Shade mentioned there was some hapu expertise in developing predator-proof fencing now, so she might be a good guy for us to lean on to get a bit more information.
Because you would talk about then reintroducing species and all that, like some of those other wildlife reserves that they've done.
I know Tipini, he mentioned future plans around the kuaka, being able to bring that back and the wider catchment. So exploring all those opportunities.
And I think if we have those aspirational goals, then we might not get there for our lifetime, but in next lifetime of some kids coming through, they might see.
I googled and we're still a little way away from de-extinction work, but they're working on it.
We have about 300 come every year to our estuary. There's about 40 wintering over, and they're just the juveniles and the ones that aren't going to breed anymore. Haven't taken the journey back to Alaska.
The kuaka.
Yeah, kuaka, godwits.
Awesome. Well, I think we've worked our way through the sort of post-it notes. I've made some notes. I see you have been too, William. Have you got any other sort of big questions for us?
Gabe, any other questions you think?
No, it's been really good. We've got quite a lot of feedback to work through now, so I think it's been really valuable corridor. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Oh, well, thank you guys very much. And I think it's been a really valuable workshop. We've clarified a whole lot of things that the team's put up to us as ideas, and hopefully given you a whole lot more by the sounds as well to keep working on. So yeah, really looking forward, Rebecca, Gabe and William, seeing you guys refine it even further and come back to us. I think the next time we probably touch base with you, I'll actually just hand over to you and you've got a slide on it. Next steps.
Here we go. Next steps. So yeah, it certainly will be kind of gathering certainly te muri wao te whanga plan, understanding what's within that, building on those principles. As Connie alluded to, working through that engagement with the hapu. So those dates, just working through those dates and getting them set, and then working this kaupapa through with them on this, and also our tag again. But yeah, really just leveraging off what we've built on here, and then exploring those potentials and opportunities, just refining them further. Anything else to add, Gabe, Rebecca?
I'm good, thanks.
I was just going to say, the invite is to all of the joint committee to join us on our engagement sessions as well. The key stakeholders workshop will be following as part of this work. When Connie and I are just sorting out the dates, we have them pretty much secure. We're just sorting venues. So yeah, that's the invitation is there, and hope that everybody can participate. And if you have any other partai or questions for us, then please just make contact through Connie or Cam.
Kapai.
Cool. Kapai.
Great. Well, thank you very much, team. I was going to say, I think the next time we probably touch base with you is after there's been a number of engagement events. So it'll be really interesting to see the feedback that comes back from all those partners and residents groups and community members with an interest in the area. So looking forward to that being another refine down again after our initial feedback today. So yeah, thank you. It's great to see it all coming together. I know there's some apprehension within our services sort of team that we make sure we align the work that's being done in an infrastructure space with this committee. So just encourage you to keep up those communications internally as well. And of course, looking forward to getting our engineer onto the TAG group, who will be an integral part, or our consultant engineer, integral part in how that actual design will work in practice on site. So yeah, Cam, I'll just ask if you've got any closing thoughts.
No, nothing specific. Great chat. Heaps of matters touched on. A lot of direction with some, and some new ideas there to sort of chase down. So yeah, just looking forward to expanding the discussion with those key stakeholders and so on. And yeah, as you say, it's going to be really interesting to see where we're at in 6 weeks' time. So feeling as though we're at a point we're making some real progress, which is nice.
Yeah, it's good. Any other comments from committee before we wrap up? No, with that being the case, Joe, would you mind closing us with karakia or Chad? Chad, thank you.
Ka whakihiri a te topi me te mauri o a tātou mahi me a tātou kōrero te ata nei ki runga ki te hekinga o te whare nei ki reira iri ake ai a tahua kia tikinga mai anō, kia mau kia ita, kia kore ai ngaro, kia papuri, tūturu ofi te whakamaua, kia tīna.
Tīna.
Haumi e hui e.
Tai kie.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
No, most welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, team online.
So, Harlan now,
Yes, and I think you're